Hello, my name is Ving Suheng, and welcome to my presentation about the Republican Party. Throughout the presentation, there will be a variety of pictures and information that I tend to bring to you in order to inform you about the Republican Party. The Republican Party has many names associated with it. One of the names is the GOP, which stands for the Grand Old Party, or the Gallant Old Party, which are both similar names. An interesting fact is that the names were adapted from the Republicans' quote-unquote rival, which is the Democratic Party. The name of GOP for the Republicans did not begin to appear in any type of print until the year of 1884. Moving on to the next name I've listed, such as social conservatives. Social conservatives are not necessarily what Republicans are, much to contrary belief, since social conservatives have a specific type of philosophical thinking, and they are not a political party. It is very much a potential section of Republicans that have this very specific type of thinking. Just as social conservatives, Federalists is not directly the Republican Party, but is a split of people within the party. There is generally always going to be a place where you can find where something is founded, and that can relate to the Republican Party as well. The very location of Jackson, Michigan, on the day of July 6, 1854, is where the citizens had met under the oaks, which is synonymous and linked with the location, that very quote. Popular assumption is that the Republican Party was formed to combat slavery, and that is partly true, since they wanted to prevent the expansion of slavery, but not intend to entirely abolish slavery. According to the book The Second Birth of the Republican Party by William Dunning, he quoted, "The single characteristic principle upon which all elements were agreed on was that the opposition of the further expansion of slavery. This was the driving factor of the Republican Party and why it was mainly created." Although this slide may seem like it is very opinionated, it is not really opinionated in the sense that every one of these names with these presidents had some influence over the entire history of America. The information in this slide comes according to the two sources of heritage.org and cspan.org, which are both organizations that are not generally profited. George Washington was not included in this list from what I read, due to the fact that he was, as the first president of the United States, he was not associated with any party at his time. The list on the screen goes from top to bottom, with George H.W. Bush being the last president spoken about. There will only be a brief explanation as to why these 5 presidents were selected. Going back to my two sources of Heritage and C-SPAN, both these sites listed Abraham Lincoln as a top 5 president, to significance of what he was able to accomplish. Abraham Lincoln enacted the Emancipation Proclamation, which would forever free the slaves in the rebel states that had participated in the Civil War. Although Lincoln did not free all slaves, this was a huge step in change for the human freedom of African Americans. An interesting yet morbid fact is that William McKinley, who was the 25th president, who was also assassinated just as Lincoln was. It was quite interesting that some of the Republicans' history has shown that most have been assassinated. In the case of why McKinley was so influential is that he had annexed Hawaii and took it over to claim it as territory, and eventually down the line, this would cause Hawaii to become the 50th state of the United States. The next name mentioned is Richard M. Nixon. Although he's remembered for the Watergate scandal, he also influenced America with that very scandal. Although this act is famous with his name, he was also in the administration that was able to get Neil Armstrong to walk on the moon. Ronald Reagan influenced America in the way that he was the president that ended the Cold War, which was a massive victory. He was also able to help in appointing the first woman in the Supreme Court. Speaking of women, they will be mentioned later on in the presentation. The last influential Republican president that had to be mentioned on this list was President George W. Bush, whose presidency is still influencing America to this day. With the tragic 9/11 events that occurred during his presidency, he enacted policies that are driving America and will continue to do so in the most likely future. There is a set of views that are always associated with any political party and what drives them and influences them. With the Republican Party, there are three core values that can be said to be important to what directs the view of the party overall. Equal taxes for all may not seem fair in the beginning, but is better than higher taxes for the wealthy. And what the Republican Party supports is having equal taxes for all. Having a well thought out approach about this issue, it is clear that higher taxes will also harm the middle and lower classes too. According to .co, they gave an interesting explanation of it all, and when they said, quote, if the feed for livestock increases due to demand, that cost increase is eventually added into the price of a gallon of milk or a pound of cheese. It is a very small notice, but eventually the higher taxes on the upper class will reach everyone at the middle and lower class, as usually the higher class is their supplier. A lot of the social issues for the Republican Party leans towards the path of no, but the majority of the reason they do so is because of the principle of conservatism, which was mentioned earlier on. According to one of the definitions from Merriam-Webster, conservatism is, quote, the tendency to prefer an existing or traditional situation to change. To complete a full understanding of what the Republican Party is and was to this very day, we have to understand what has been said to be quote-unquote negative about the party. The principle of being a Republican is surrounded around less government action, and that is one of the negatives that is associated with the party. According to thebalance.com, they say, reduces government aid, which forces some to go without essentials. Although the website does not specify what essentials they are speaking about, there can only be an assumption that it revolves around government services, which is what counts as government aid. Laying back to something that was spoken about earlier, the higher taxes for the wealthy. According to thebalance.com, they say as well that, quote, the wealthy pay most of the taxes, so receive most of the tax cut benefits. The tax cut benefits make sense, and with the speaking of how the wealthy pay most of the taxes, it is set at a fair rate, as a higher supplier always equals a higher demand. The symbol of the Republican Party has been associated with the party for quite a while, that symbol being, of course, the elephant. The addition of animals being associated with the Republicans and the Democrats originally started with the work of a German cartoonist, Thomas Nast. There are a variety of reasons the animals are associated with both parties throughout time, such as when in the second term of Ulysses S. Grant, the Democrats repressing the voters' fears with the thought of a third term for Grant. Nast used a drawing to show an elephant returning from a donkey and lion skin to work off the sheep's and wolves' clothing in a way. Another occasion is in time is when Nast drew a painting to show the loss of the majority of the House of Representatives in 1874. The drawings and cartoons were truly exquisite to look at, but moving towards another subject. There has to be a dedication and a section dedicated to how women have been involved with the Republican Party. According to Melanie Gustafson, in her book, Women in the Republican Party, 1854-1924, she quotes, the Republican Party might praise women's political appointments, but it was the Democrats who made the greatest leap. It's not necessarily negative or positive, but it was crucial information that I gathered towards the very beginning of the reading. It is a positive bit of information that I was able to gather reading later on. In the 1884 campaign, Gustafson wrote, Republican women chose to represent themselves as bearers of mortality, honorable men, in spite of their earlier denouncements of the party. With time progressing, relationships are bound to change, and that is exactly how the relationship with women and the Republican Party has gone and will continue to go on. Going into the concluding moments of this presentation, and to get an overall final thought about the Republican Party, it has to be said that the history gathered has been very informative and exciting to find, and there was even things that were unknown until further and deeper gathering had to be found. The presentation is far from over. there must be a slot for the interview, and that was secured when I was able to talk with the current chairman of Michigan's 3rd Congressional Republican Committee. Not only that, he was a former chairman for the 2nd Congressional Committee, which Muskegon is located in. I spoke with Mike Hewitt. The interview was approximately around 10 minutes. It was very informative and confirmative. Getting a confirmation about the year of the foundation for the Republican Party, he confirmed that it was formed around the year of 1854. There were not only questions that I asked, there was simple information that Mike was willing to add on that helped give me more knowledge about the party. Mr. Hewitt also spoke about what he truly believes is the principles behind the Republican Party. He spoke about how he believes that the Republicans of now and in the past were driven on freedom, and the party can be brought into the conversation of being classical liberal. One of the reasons that Mike decided to join the politics, and specifically the Republican Party, was due to the fact that he was concerned about the future of the government and how it would affect his grandchildren. When I asked the question about, quote, is politics becoming too driven by corporations and not citizens, he responded saying that politics are driven by social media and the media, but not necessarily corporations, because there are still people in the corporation. When asked about, quote, what drives a Republican voter, Mike said that generally Republican voters vote for freedom over the policies, of which Democratic voters vote for policies. Going on to ask Mike how long he has been in politics, he stated he had been in the political industry since the year of 1987. So early on in the presentation, I spoke about the location of the Republican Party starting in Jackson, Michigan. Hewitt said that something very intriguing, and he said Jackson, Michigan had a possibility of being not the original place where the Republican Party started, and it could be somewhere in Illinois. Also, to add on that, he got asked by me if he were to ever have been in Jackson, Michigan, which he said that he had. When asked about the hardest part of his job, he said that he finds none of it particularly hard because he simply enjoys working with people, which he does frequently. This would then lead on to an opinionated question of sorts, where he was asked who was his favorite president of the Republican Party, and he selected Ronald Reagan and Thomas Jefferson because of how they were both able to expand the liberties of Americans. Going back to the principles of the Republican Party, which would soon lead to the concluding moments of the call, he spoke about how the county level is really against the federal level in the eyes of a Republican, and that is what he supports. And the Democrats want a strong central government, in which the previous words about county levels of support for the Republicans gives off the opposite view. In conclusion of the interview, it is found to be very informative and quite an experience. Moving on to the works cited images page, the first picture quoted is from Mike Hewitt's and his MikeHewittShow.com page, which show the image of him. The second picture quoted is of Thomas Nast and his drawing, of which the donkey was chasing the elephant. The third quote is also a Thomas Nast picture, which shows the House of Representatives being lost by the Republicans in 1874. And the final picture that I sourced was the Women's Party with the senators of New Jersey at that time. The final slide is the works cited for the information that I was able to gather throughout the presentation. The first website is C-SPAN, which spoke about Abraham Lincoln and putting him in the top 5. And I chose that because it was very interesting and it connected to what I needed to be found. The next site comes from Imelda Kimberly and thebalance.com, which is where I found the policy for the Republican Party. The next source is Stefano James and theheritage.org, which also spoke about Abraham Lincoln being one of the top presidents. The next site that I had sourced was from thedifference.com by Clarice, who did not have a last name. And this is where I found the information to help me differ the conservatives and Republicans. The next website source is just Webster. Next source cited was Merriam-Webster and the definition of conservatism, followed by William A. Dunning in his book, The Second Birth of the Republican Party, which was a JSTOR source, along with Melanie Gustafson in her book, Women in the Republican Party, 1854-1924, which was also from JSTOR. The next source mentioned is Marcus Hawkins in his article titled, How Do Higher Taxes for the Rich Ultimately Hurt the Poor? This is also from ThoughtCall, where I got the interesting higher demand example. The next source is also from ThoughtCall, but this is by Martin Kelly, Why the Republican Presidents Would Win a Tug of War. And this is where I found the information about the 5 Republican presidents that I selected that had the most influence over America. History.com was also another source that was able to give me information. In the article written by Christopher Klein, Why is the Republican Party Known as the GOP, helped me find out that the Republican Party was also called the GOP. History.com was also another source that was able to give me information. In the article written by Christopher Klein, Why is the Republican Party Known as the GOP, helped me find out that the Republican Party was also called the GOP. The second to last source came directly from the Jackson County Republican Committee, which spoke about the location of the Republican Party and where it started. And the last source is just about the Republican views on taxes, which gave me more information about Republicans and their view on taxes. Overall, that is all the information I gathered for my presentation. I really enjoyed doing it, honestly, and I really like the information that I was able to gather. Thank you for listening.